What's going on, guys? Matt Kelly here, and today I am doing something I've never done before, which is an actual interview with a real person, and that is Stu.
A real person.
Thank you for agreeing to do this, first of all.
No, you're welcome.
Now, anyone who's watched this channel before knows that I've talked about Stu multiple times. They've seen you on my phone while I'm watching videos while I'm actually restoring a boat. So you'll see the phone sitting on the boat while I'm sanding or something. But then more recently, we mentioned in a past video that Renko's actually been at our house, which is cool. And just done a real restoration recently. You've been on a bunch of big adventures. And before Renko leaves today, thought we'd do a little interview. So, thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Anyone who doesn't know, Stu's been the OG of I'd call it like marine YouTube, certainly in Australia. Interestingly, the first video that I saw on there was how to build an outboard like storage rack. So
yes,
timber rack. And I almost want to start there. What made you go, I assume you were going to build it anyway. What made you go, I'm going to start on YouTube?
So I think the main reason for starting on YouTube was watching YouTube, I guess. And at the time I'd been watching a lot of Eric the Car Guy videos. So absolutely I could say that's the channel that got me starting my own channel. And I think there was a lot of car channels around. And I think it really came from the fact that there just wasn't that many outboard channels. And living on the island, you need your outboards. Everyone did. So there's an element of DIY that's inherent to using a boat as a commuter boat, because it's broken. You can't even get it to the mainland to get it to a mechanic. So, you know, if you get it going, then you can get to shore. You know, you may still have it serviced professionally, but you need to save yourself quite often. So that was probably, so Eric the Car Guy would be the start of wanting to make videos, and the nature of boating on the island was definitely the need for the DIY outboard repair from everyone. So that's probably the two things that brought it together.
Right, I'm going to go off script a bit here, which is probably fairly typical for most of my videos. Living on an island. So anyone overseas will think you're Australians, you already live on an island.
Yeah.
You live on a real island, which is like close to mainland, but also close is not close enough when you need something. Can you talk about, like, you built your whole channel around the Dangar name, which is Dangar Island.
It is, yes.
Can you talk a bit about that process? What got you to that point of wanting to be there?
Yeah, good question. So I think the thing that ultimately made us end up on the island, well, a few different things. One is my partner Vicky had a friend who lived on the island, and she lived there for a long time, since they were quite young. So we knew of the island because of her friend. We were looking to buy our first place as well, and looking around at what we could afford, which was not much. And it turned out we could either live a long, long, long way inland somewhere, or buy on the island. The island's cheap because it's inconvenient. And we sort of tossed it up and said, well, where would we rather be? And for the budget we had, the island made a lot of sense in some ways, because I thought it was an inconvenient place, but also a geographically beautiful place to be. And that's sort of the toss-up. You could have convenience or you know, being on an island in nature and all this kind of thing. And it sort of comes back a little bit to that first question, that being inconvenient and being an island, there's a strong sense of community. People look after each other. Like, you won't break down the river without somebody offering you a lift. And the same thing goes, oh, my outboard's not started. And that's really how I started learning about mechanical things, was from other residents saying, oh, I know why that's not working. And you have a few little successes. You go, oh, it started again. I fixed that. I didn't have to take it to the man, you know, go and find a real man. So that was sort of a nice sort of experience that motivates you to continue down that learning path. So yeah, so I think that's why we ended up there, and it's also, I think, another aspect of how the island helped grow the mechanical interest and the channel. Yeah. Right.
No, it's interesting. I think there is an inconvenience factor that makes sense. It makes sense that it's cheaper to live there, and I probably speak for many when I say it makes, like, I'm willing to endure a pretty poor commute for a good lifestyle when I'm not in the city. And I think that's the case for many people. Make that decision. I think it's cool.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it's also funny in that, so I guess for context as well, like, a lot of islands have bridges or car ferries, and Dangar has none of those. So you have to get your shopping out of a car, put it into a tinny, go across, take it out of the tinny, put it in a wheelbarrow, push the wheelbarrow up the hill, carry it up the stairs, like, you know, so it is about as inconvenient as it gets in some ways. But then it makes you look at other islands. We've been looking around, and you see islands like Russell Island where there's a car ferry, and you go, oh, imagine going shopping, driving onto a car ferry and driving home. Yes, you might wait for the ferry timetable, but that just seems really convenient to me now. So you look at places like that and you go, well, that's appealing.
I don't have to service my own engine.
No, I can, and I could literally put, you know, it's all well and good when you, it's a bit of shopping, but suddenly when you want to bring home like 40 bags of topsoil for the garden or something, you know, the ability to put it in a car, drive the car on a ferry, drive to your door. So that type of island living, I think, you know, sounds like bliss.
Interesting. Russell Island isn't actually that far from here. Like the smaller blocks, which are still very close to the beach, very close to the water, you're talking sub $20,000 a block.
I know, it's amazing, isn't it?
When you think about you're on an island, in this case in Moreton Bay, it's like kind of amazing. Like to spend that kind of money on property, you're going hours inland.
That's
otherwise.
That's your choice, and particularly when you got that ferry, I just think, wow, you know,
good life.
Yeah, it doesn't sound too bad.
Yeah, interesting. Let's move back to what everyone I think here who certainly knows your content will be interested in, and that's Renko. So obviously on Renko right now. You've had Renko for years now. It's been
3 years now. I think.
It's been like obviously it's been on the hard stand multiple times. Engine in and out multiple times. We all saw mid 2021 where you did a lot of work to it up at Bundaberg. What's the current state? Where is it up to now? What have you done most recently? Where are we up to?
So the last round was really, in some ways, the finishing touches. In that, I think people wanted me to get rid of the rust and paint really early in the project, and because it gives you a good visual, you know, big bang for your buck sort of thing. And so the last round was really about cutting all the rust out and doing a final paint job. It actually looks a little bit rusty now, but it turns out that a lot of that is actually things that are on the boat that are steel are now rusting and running down.
Just stuff everywhere.
So I think I'm going to replace quite a few things like chairs and boxes with aluminium versions just to stop that happening. But I think it's really got to the point now where it's as finished as a boat is. Like a boat is never finished, but it's across the line. You know, to my mind, the project is finished. There's always improvements you can do. There's always maintenance that's going to need to happen. But that final round, and it was I think it made sense to do it at the end too. Otherwise, all that, you know, rust you cut out or whatever would have just got damaged during the other parts of the process. Right. So really the last round was mostly cosmetic. Actually, to be honest with you, mostly cosmetic, but also a few livability things like the table we're standing at now. And the nice thing about doing it at the end is it was born from the experience of living on board for probably, what was it, at least 3 months before we got to Bundaberg. So we knew what worked and what didn't work. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's not a livable boat. We don't plan to live on it, but it's going to be a work boat predominantly. But it means now that on the weekends you could go on the Hawkesbury, go down the river and spend a very comfortable long weekend on the boat, you know, somewhere comfortable to sleep. You know, the bed was made wider while we're at Bundaberg, got the table, got storage with the XDM drawers and things. You know, things like that really made a big difference to what it was like to spend time on board. Added a couple hundred litres of fresh water, barbecue. So you can just get on board, got the fridge going, bring some beers, bring some steaks, and very comfortably stay for, you know, 3 nights, easy.
I think it's interesting that, like, this was an open space, effectively an open space. Obviously, you've got a big hatch underneath here. But, like, it didn't take much to turn this into what feels like effectively a living room. Yeah,
so it's very common when people do trawlers. The really common thing to do is to take the cabin, just extend it to the back. So you've got a small deck at the back and a much more internal space. This boat, I think, A, it's predominantly going to be a work boat. And B, it's too small, I think, to do that. I think even if this was all an internal space, you'd be, you know. So, and having the deck area is good for diving and things. You've got plenty of space to put your wetsuit on and that kind of thing. So I think it's a bit of a compromise. But really what made this possible was having the other hatch down in the cabin that meant you could get in and check the oil. Otherwise, I couldn't do this because you couldn't do a quick oil check without lifting the engine hatch off. So really, yes, the second hatch access into the engine bay is what made this possible.
No,
and that was all a part of the Bundaberg changes.
Right. No, that makes sense. And like I say, to me, and I know it's not supposed to be a liverboard, but this is almost what makes it viable as a liverboard.
It does, yeah.
It's just space to hang.
Well, that's it. And then, and obviously, you know, this can be a good workbench too. If you're working on an outboard, you could. Yeah. I mean, it doesn't have lips on it. Like I think if I was to work on an outboard, I'd probably get like a stainless tray with an edge.
Yes.
So you can put your parts and not have them go rolling off everywhere.
Yeah.
I prefer that to the discomfort of the fiddles on the edges of the table all the time. Yep. So I think that'll be a part of making it this hybrid weekender on the weekends, but workboat Monday to Friday.
No, it makes sense. Makes sense. When I think about Renko, obviously you've done a huge amount of work on it yourself. There's been, I'm sure there's a lot of people that buy a boat like this and get a lot of professional help, and you've done a bit of that with people like Adrian, who's been pretty heavily involved. But I think about some of the accessories and pieces that you've either bought or built, and I think when we think about boats, you can sort of spend a huge amount of money and you know you're going to get something really amazing. You can spend a really small amount of money and get something pretty trash. When you think about like the lowest cost or lowest effort modifications that have had massive value, because I think that's interesting to people who either have a boat and are thinking about sort of expanding or modifying or whatever, or even people who are thinking about getting into this market. It's like, what's the thing that's added a lot of value to you?
Yeah. So I think the thing sort of was a couple of things. So the early one I would have said was the awning, like having the shade, the rain protection, and not that you get a lot of rain protection, it really needs clears on the side too, but a roof full of solar. Like you just can't have enough electricity on a boat. It was funny, my mate Pete, we put some solar on his Halverson a couple of days ago, and it's the first time it's had solar. It had none until then. And it's almost like you just go, finally, power's coming in endlessly. The fridge can stay on, and not feel guilty about it. You're not burning electricity for no reason. You just sort of go, well, it's just free electricity.
The battery is not going to run out.
No, so you step on board and there's cold drinks or even like frozen foods. You go, we didn't expect to go overnight. Let's defrost some sausages and eat.
That's cool.
So I think definitely the awning, I think, gave us the shade we needed, and it gave us enough power to know your bilge pumps are on. You can leave your AIS on and track the boat. You can have a fridge running 24/7. It doesn't have to go near shore power at all. So I'd say that's probably the thing I just went, wow, I'm really, really glad I did that.
I mean, like we've had the boat here for a couple of months, have not really, it's like for the first week I came down quite a few times and hit the bilge pump, just make sure everything was okay. That paranoia of not wanting Renko to sink next to my house.
Not on my watch.
No, I don't want to be that guy. But it was interesting that I think you made a comment like, don't worry, it's self-sufficient. It'll be fine.
It
and
is.
It actually is genuinely I mean, if you've got a battery, a float switch and solar, you don't need much else.
No, that's it. It's got, and it's multiple bilge pumps on multiple battery banks. So they're on two different battery banks. And so it can live on a mooring and be unattended for a long time and be pretty safe. So I think that was probably the main thing. Honestly, I'd probably put the table now into the same category. This tabletop was $120 from Bunnings.
Nice.
Just cheap. And then the drawers were actually pretty affordable too. They were. I mean, the marine ones were like $1,200, and I put these in for $200 or something, and each they were, and they still work. I mean, the idea in my mind was I'd run with them, and if they really proved to work out, and then they rusted, then I would you'd go, right, it's worth upgrading to some marine ones, and they've certainly worked out well.
Yeah, it makes sense. No, it's cool. Is it when you think about like the bigger pieces of work or the bigger projects or the high expense items, there's plenty of things on here that I know cost a lot of money. An engine sitting underneath this is one of them. Like, is there anything that you've put in that's really expensive or that you've gone, actually, we didn't need to do that, or that was too much? Obviously, the engine is critical and essential.
I probably didn't need to get it rebuilt twice, though.
So, ideally not,
So that's probably the biggest bit of money, I guess you'd say, was unnecessary and, well, unfortunate.
Necessary at the time.
So I think more in the sense that I think if I'd found Adrian first and gone, right. So I think the lesson from that is, so I think there's two layers of it. There's what can I do myself? What do I need someone else to do? And I definitely think it's important to get the right, someone else to do some things. Like another classic example of that was sandblasting the hull. A guy came in for a couple of grand, sandblasted the whole hull, and I could get some paint on that day. So it was really good to hire him. Hiring someone to do the engine, because I wasn't that familiar with it, was good. The only thing is I should have gone one step further and found the specialist. Like, you don't sort of go to the GP for your brain operation, and in some ways I wish I'd sort of just, I guess the trouble is you don't know what you don't know, and that's the thing. So I didn't realise how unusual Detroit's are compared to other 4-stroke motors or whatever. So I think if I'd looked for a Detroit specialist in my area, Adrian would have come up straight away, and I would have circumvented that whole process of lifting it out twice. So that's probably about the only thing. Everything else I'm pretty happy with. I think there's an element though where there's sort of a meta sort of argument to that, where is the sum of the parts worth it? Like I think every individual thing, I go, what would I have not put on? I go, you know, even things that you could say are sort of almost may appear like luxury items, like you look at things like the FLIR camera.
Yes.
But every time we do a night passage, I turn that on and it gives me such a confidence. Like, I mean, don't me wrong, the radar's awesome. It shows up amazing amount of detail, even picks up mooring buoys.
Wow.
But then you see something and you point the camera at it, and because they're integrated too, you can just say, what's that on my radar? Point the camera at that for me.
Yes.
And then you go, oh, look, it's a whale. You can see it in the camera,
Wow.
you know, and things like that. There's things that you won't use all the time. Like, simple examples, little sea anchor. I may never use it, but when I need it, I'm really, really going to want it.
Yeah.
So the only argument to me really is that at the end of the day, it's a very, very capable 30-foot boat, and I probably would have been better off putting all of that into a 45-foot boat is probably the only, yes. Not finding Adrian for the engine first and maybe not doing a bigger boat are the only regrets.
Yeah.
But there's nothing on the boat now that I'd want to be without, really. Yeah.
That's
you mightn't use it every day, but
when you need it, you want it.
Yeah.
I think it's also nice that for both of those things, it's like, yeah, there might have been a false start. You found Adrian.
Yeah, sure.
And if the other worst thing is, you know, you're 10 foot shorter than you could have been,
yes.
It's like, that's also a pretty good, a totally fine problem to have.
It is, and look, don't get me wrong, it's no one boat's great at everything. And what is great about Renko is it's very, very easy for one person to jump on, drop the mooring. I mean, I can almost hold the mooring line and be back on the wheel in under a second. Right. You know, that's how close you are.
Yes.
At night, you can steer standing out of the boat. You're not looking through glass. You can pull up to a pontoon, leave the wheel and throw a rope. Like it very much is a one-up boat. You can drive it by yourself, no problem. And so I kind of remind myself of that, where I go, yeah, maybe it was bigger and maybe there'd be a whole lot of new problems. So it's absolutely got its strengths, and it's good for on the river.
Yes.
I can just get there in Red Dwarf 2.
Yes.
And, you know, drop the mooring, go to Brooklyn, buy something and come back in it. You know, like that's not something you can do.
It's not hard to get running. We saw last week, it was like from the boat sitting here for a month to driving was 60 seconds.
Yeah, totally. Yeah,
Like ropes off.
Yeah, it's a very usable boat. Yeah.
I guess when it's designed for work, that's important. You don't have to spend an hour getting it ready.
No, or shutting down or whatever, yeah.
So talking about Renko and continuing down that conversation, future modifications, like you could do, imagine you could do anything to it. No price, no money, no time. You've got infinite support.
Yep.
What would you love to do?
It's a good question. So I wouldn't say there's anything I'd absolutely love to do. There's things I'm considering doing, but I'm not even if they were no issue, I still don't know if I'd want to do them.
Cool, that's great then.
Yeah, it is interesting. So one of them is some form of stabiliser, because it's a very tender boat. And I was a little bit torn about it. So there was davits and a stabiliser. So rather than towing the inflatable, we'd have that up on davits, which is good. And then I saw when I was in Gladstone once, there was a boat that had the arms that swung out and then the paravanes went down. And then when they were lifted right up, you could move the arms pointing astern. They were longer than, they went past the end of the boat and they became davits to lift a tender up. And I went, wow, that's, when I was on the fence for both those features, it suddenly went, ooh, got a bit more compelling when you could have one feature that did both those things. So that's probably, if I do any major change, that's probably it. That's probably the one I would do. I had been talking about extending the cabin forward. This boat, it's only a 30-foot boat, but even for a 30-foot boat, it doesn't use the space particularly wisely. You've got a little cabin. The cabin could be wider, and you could go right to the bow as a V-berth sort of thing, and you would have a lot more internal space. But once again, I think you've got to know what a boat's for. Part of me goes, at the moment you can walk right around the wheelhouse, which is great when it comes to tending lines, towing fenders.
For a work boat,
It's a good feature, yeah.
Yeah.
So my thought is, and by the same token, it's going to live in the Hawkesbury pretty much the rest of its life now. It's not a great sea boat. It's okay, but it needs calm conditions, hence still being here. So by that same token then, do I need stabilisers and do I need to lift a tender out of the water?
Right.
Not really. So they're two things I would consider, but what I don't want to do is take a great little workboat and make it into a bad cruising boat and a bad workboat. I think it's better off being good at one thing than being average at two.
Yes.
Yeah.
We've seen that happen many times.
Yeah, and that... Yeah.
It's easy to over-engineer something that actually does its job pretty well and to try and make it more of something that it isn't.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think we've seen that in the four-wheel drive market, right? It's
yeah,
like
right.
Historically and like more like I think like we see it with cars all the time where just over time they become worse at what they were originally designed to do and better for a different purpose but then often not great at most things. And I think it would be very easy to do that in a case like this, because I guess you have a platform that could be turned into anything. It's big and open, so you could do a lot with it, but you probably don't need to.
So one argument against that is the plan I sort of said on my channel a while ago, which was the idea of, because it's not a huge boat, is pushing a barge, and because this boat has lots of good gear on it, good engine, good electronics, pushing a dumb barge that just doesn't have a motor of its own, it's just a platform, makes a lot of sense.
Right.
So you go, that's just a steel barge we build, it docks to the bow of Renko, it's got maybe like a generator, an air compressor and a hydraulic crane, and it's just a work platform we push around. Then the argument is you could make this a slightly better boat for humans because the work actually happens over there. So there's an argument then to say extend the wheelhouse so that maybe you could be on a job up the river. It takes a long way to go up the river. At the moment there's only sleeping for one person or a couple. And if you had a bit of a work crew, it kind of might be nice to have two separate bunk areas or something, so you could go and do a job, push the barge up. Takes you a couple of days to get up there. So when you're there, you're going to stay until the job's done and come back. So there is an argument to say, in combination with a barge, could this be more of this is where the people happen and that's where the work happens?
Right.
You know, that's one way to go. Yeah. But once again, I think I'd build the barge first. I think a danger with these things is building things in theory.
Right.
I think have a concrete need that's proven and then do the work. Otherwise you go, oh, I thought that would change my life for the better, and didn't.
And I spent a lot of money and a lot of time.
A lot of time, you know. So I think we'll do the barge first, because I think that's got a lot of merit, you know, because you could have a crane capable of lifting a couple of tons then. You could get a barge big enough you could drive the Land Rover onto, and have loading ramps and that kind of thing. So that would, I think, would just elevate the type of work we could do hugely. Yeah.
I think I speak for everyone, hopefully, when I say, and you guys can rally behind this, like that would be some pretty cool content. Yeah,
well, I think it'd be fun because it's also a build, whereas this was a restoration. It would be a design the barge, maybe with some pretty cool features. You know, we've had some ideas about it, design it, build it from scratch and launch it. That'd be quite a satisfying thing, I think, to go, no, we built this barge absolutely from scratch.
Like big sound system.
Oh, that's all, beer fridge, big sound system, barbecue, little crane on the corner.
Just a little, just reload the Renko crane.
Oh, not that big, no.
No, just a little tripod. Yeah. Cool. Well, you made an interesting comment there. You said that would be a real build. Mm-hmm. Imagine this scenario. You've got the barge, you've got Renko, they're sitting on a mooring somewhere and they're fine. Mm-hmm. You're embarking on a new project. Mm-hmm. Buy, restore, or build?
Good question. I think as I get older, I probably feel maybe like a barge build. I think is achievable because it's all flat and square and whatever. I think a build is a big job. I would probably even go more for buy because of the experience of the cost of restoring. I think you can find a boat that is in pretty good condition and buy it, and you're miles ahead of the game, both energy, time, and financially. Yeah. I think that was a real learning curve for me. Just because it's hard and time consuming, you're doing it yourself doesn't mean it's cheap. It can be expensive and those things.
Yes. And it's expensive and you value your time at basically nothing.
The difference is you need the money up front. You know, so Renko was under 10 grand. You could buy it and you could save the money and do it. I know Damien and Jess said the same thing with Brewpeg. Like, they've done things a certain way because it didn't mean you needed the money up front. You could do a bit of work, save some more money, do some more work. So there's that argument. But I still think if somebody had lent me 80 grand, whatever, and you'd bought an 80 grand boat and paid the interest off, you would still actually be ahead financially than fixing a
from scratch.
They say there's nothing more expensive than a free boat, and that saying I think really is true. I think, you know, and even if it was a 40 grand boat, like, you know, you would just be so far ahead of the game compared to essentially a free boat. You know, I probably even paid too much for Renko. It was probably a boat that should have been given free. Away. You know, given when I finally saw the true condition.
Sure. It feels counterintuitive because I think, and maybe it's just because if you're wired sort of like we are, you look for the best in it, and I think you go into it really optimistically.
You do, so totally.
No one, like, you see a boat that you can afford. It's like you're going to find every reason for why that's a great investment.
Why it's a great boat. And I loved it, and I've certainly seen worse boats, but it's the things that sort of, like, you know, the engine problem. I think if the engine had been really good, it might have been better. But the other funny thing is it had, you know, this sort of black and white LCD electronics. You've got a sat nav here, a sounder here, none of which work particularly well. And you look at it, and on paper you go, oh, I've got this boat, it's running, it's got sat nav, it's got this, it's got that. And at the end of the day, one multifunction display like the Marine blows all of that stuff away.
You're going to pull it all out anyway.
And like, there's no point. If you don't want it, its value is zero. Actually, it's less than that because you've got to spend some time taking it out, you know, so...
it's like buying something because it's on sale, not because
exactly. So I think, I mean, I wasn't looking for a boat either. It was a little bit of a spur of the moment. It wasn't a plan. And so I think the money you spend up front, I think, start saving and really look. If you spend a year finding the best boat you can, that's gold. You know what I mean? Like that just puts you so far ahead of the game. And the more you can front load the expense, the more you kind of got up front, the more you will save. It's cheaper. It's not a case of just saying, oh, throw money, it'll go away. It's like throw money wisely. And you will save money.
No, I think that's very fair. And to that point then, so just say you'd go down the path of, you know, saving up more, buying rather than building, and buying is probably still a good modification platforms, and you're, you're the kind of person that's going to make changes no matter what.
Oh, totally,
Do you go in the future, are you always steel, or are you always, is it have to be something you can weld? Like, I've done plenty of fiberglass boats myself and love it.
No, I don't mind glassing. I wouldn't say I'm a steel fanatic. I like steel for its ease of repair. I think glass is great. Glass, I mean, there's a reason that a lot of boats are made out of glass. You know, it doesn't rot, doesn't rust. Modern epoxies, modern glass, modern techniques means osmosis and things isn't as common as it was or whatever. So I think glass is good. Interestingly, had a few conversations with Damien about aluminium versus steel. And although it's not as strong and it's more expensive, we're sort of starting to question the true expense. So Malcolm had a big trial catamaran that was there. He loves aluminium boats. And he said, I see you with your grinder or your plasma cutter. He said, I get a circular saw and I run it down a huge length of aluminium and it's cut. And I weld it. And he said, so aluminium's more expensive, but then you sandblast it and buy 6 coats of really expensive epoxy. And he says, so by the time I weld it together and go, what should I do now? Ah, nothing. You know, let the oxide layer form and let it be good forever. I would err towards aluminium. I think it's very easy to work with. And I think the cost of aluminium is offset by the fact that you don't need to do anything to prevent rust happening at the time or in the future of the boat. So I think if I was to build something from scratch, and don't be wrong, I'd consider it because I think it would be immensely satisfying, but I think I would do aluminium.
Oh, interesting, That's probably a reason why every bank of every river of every bay in Australia has tinnies dragged up on it. Like, they last forever.
Well, the other thing is, interestingly, they say steel doesn't really work that well on boats under 40 foot, is the rule of thumb. So it's interesting. So really this should be an aluminium boat. Until about 40 foot, and then suddenly you get to ships and steel's your only choice sort of thing. The other option is to have a nice little diesel Delstar, Dave's trawler. It's a 30 foot as well. Had a little Perkins in it, I think it was. But he could get a good sort of 12 knots out of that. He'd actually planed. So suddenly the option to have a 30-foot boat that's a bit quicker is there in aluminium too. Not to mention the no rust issues, still and MIG welding aluminium is fast. Like you can just throw aluminium down and weld it up, and repaired easily as well. You know, patches, cut it out. Like it's a good material. Having
done plenty of fiberglass repairs, it's a lot of prep and a lot of grinding and being very itchy for a long period of time. So
it's not a good thing about glass, is it?
No, it can be pretty bad actually. So so I love it because I think it's a very low barrier, and maybe it's because welding actually I look at it as a real skill, being able to weld well. Whereas to me, fiberglassing was a really low bar to learn.
Yes, so it is very doable glassing. Like I think a few basic, get your mix ratio right, wet it out the right amount. Buy good epoxy. I've always just bought the West System stuff. It's not cheap, but I just know it works. And it is. It's you sort of look at it and you go, I did it. Yeah. I watched a YouTube video yesterday and I did it today. That is good about it. Yeah.
All right, I'm going to wrap this up because we've got to get on the road. And by the road, I mean on the water. What's next? Is the barge the next project? I know that you're doing a bunch of stuff with Adrian and looking at some cool stuff on your channel.
Well, next step really is getting the boat home. Yes. And then really trying to, and once again, it's the thing of not foreseeing a need. I think we'll start working the boat. We'll be doing some mobile mechanical work, some dive work, some salvage work, everything from I dropped my wedding ring in the water to, my boat sank. Cool. And I think if the need arises for the barge, we'll do that. Yeah. But I think suddenly if no one's really, you're not getting, because there are plenty of companies around the river who are just barge companies. Right. So we wouldn't be competing with them, we'd be just trying to do mechanical work using it, whereas they're all deliveries. We wouldn't do deliveries and stuff. Right. But I think if a real need didn't present itself, then you're probably better thinking of something else. Yeah. In which case, I'd probably build a submarine. Yeah. Well, there you go. All right. Well, we'll look forward to that then. All right, Stu. Thank you for doing this. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
And guys, make sure you thank Stu in the comments for this one. I really appreciate it. I'm sure you guys will as well. Cheers.
Thank you. Thanks, mate.
Well, if you got this far, thank you so much for watching. I really want to thank Dangar Stu for his for the time and attention that he gave this interview. Mate, truly appreciate it. I think I speak for everyone when I say it's really good to get that deeper level of insight. Just really cool. And for those of you who are interested in what else I've got going on this channel, I've done a bunch of boat restorations from a couple of really old fiberglass runabouts that required complete rebuilds. I did one a few years ago, and then one more recently in the last couple of years, which went really well and was everything from transom stringers to floor to paint to outboard to everything. Did a cool half cabin restoration a couple of years ago that I think some of you will really like if you're into those sort of classic lines of a power boat. I think it was a really cool one. And then the other thing that I do a lot of is trialing some pretty interesting boats. I did a Razor Cat a few years ago. I've just bought a new bow rider to go on some cool adventures and document that process. So if you're interested in any of that at all, I would encourage you to hit the subscribe button, and I would really appreciate seeing you guys soon. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll talk to you guys later.